The night Eveline Ashcombe disappeared, the entire capital blamed love. But it was never love she feared, it was ownership. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, if your entire future had already been decided for you, would you run too? And if you love emotional historical dramas filled with betrayal, impossible romance, and slow-burning tension, subscribe now, because this story only gets darker from here. 3 days before her engagement announcement, Eveline stood perfectly still while her mother tightened the diamonds around her throat. "Do try to look grateful," Lady Ashcombe said. The necklace belonged to women who had survived unhappy marriages long enough to become cruel. Eveline stared at herself in the mirror. 22 years old, educated in French literature, estate law, and piano performance, raised to smile softly, speak carefully, never embarrass a man in public. And now, sold. The man waiting downstairs was Lord Percival Whitmore, 46, politically powerful, widowed twice, and rumored to inspect women the way merchants inspected horses. Her father called him security. Society called him an excellent match. Eveline called him a prison sentence. Outside the mansion windows, London drowned beneath cold spring rain. Carriages rolled through muddy streets while newspaper boys shouted about factory strikes near Whitechapel. That part mattered, because while nobles drank imported wine under chandeliers, real people were starving 2 miles away. And Eveline knew it. Unlike most women in her circle, she had spent years secretly slipping out of aristocratic gatherings disguised in servant clothing just to walk among ordinary people. She'd seen exhausted mothers sewing until dawn, children sleeping beside bakery ovens for warmth, men missing fingers from textile mills. The newspapers blamed economic adjustment. The poor called it survival. That was the year protests against arranged financial marriages quietly began appearing in women's journals across England. Not openly, never openly, but hidden beneath essays about female independence and the burden of duty. Eveline collected those essays secretly beneath her mattress. Her mother would have burned them. "You are trembling," Lady Ashcombe noticed. "I'm cold. You're frightened." Eveline met her reflection carefully. Yes, but not for the reason her mother believed. That evening, Lord Whitmore arrived carrying white roses, a manipulator's flower, apology flowers, ownership flowers. He kissed Eveline's hand and held it slightly too long. "I hear," he said smoothly, "you enjoy reading. I do. That can be corrected." Her father laughed immediately. Eveline did not. The silence stretched long enough to become dangerous. Then Lord Whitmore smiled, not warmly, the way hunters smiled after spotting movement in tall grass. "I prefer obedient wives," he said quietly. And for the first time in her life, Eveline understood something terrifying. If she stayed here, piece by piece, she would disappear. Not physically, worse, internally. That night, she packed only one suitcase. Not jewels, not gowns, books, a wool dress, a servant's cloak, her late grandmother's compass, and 300 pounds she'd secretly saved over 4 years. At midnight, her younger brother Thomas caught her climbing through the rear kitchen entrance. He stared in horror. "You're truly leaving?" "Yes, they'll destroy you. They'll destroy me if I stay." Thomas swallowed hard. "You have nowhere to go." Eveline pulled up her hood. "Then nowhere will have to be enough." Before leaving, she pressed a folded letter into his hand. "If father asks, wait until morning." Then she vanished into the rain. By dawn, the Ashcombe estate erupted into chaos. Her father called the police. Her mother fainted theatrically twice. Lord Whitmore reportedly shattered a crystal glass against the dining room wall. But the most dangerous reaction came quietly. Lord Whitmore ordered private investigators to find her before the scandal reached Parliament. Because abandoned fiancé created gossip, but runaway brides created humiliation, and powerful men rarely forgave humiliation. For 11 days, Eveline traveled north under a false name, Emma Bell, a widow's daughter, no title, no inheritance, no future worth noticing. And for the first time in her life, people spoke honestly around her. At crowded inns, women discussed rising bread prices and husbands lost in railway accidents. Laborers argued over wages. Farmers cursed wealthy landowners raising rents after poor harvest seasons. The England she'd grown up reading about in books did not exist. This one did, dirty, cold, alive. She should have felt terrified. Instead, she felt free until the storm arrived. The rain began just after dusk near Blackthorn Moor. Not ordinary rain, violent rain, the kind that bent trees sideways and swallowed roads whole. Her carriage driver refused to continue. "We stop here," he barked. "There's no village for miles." "Then pray harder." He unloaded her suitcase into mud and rode away before she could argue. Within minutes, Eveline was soaked through completely. Wind tore at her hood as thunder rolled across the hills like cannon fire. She stumbled blindly through darkness until she finally saw light in the distance. A massive estate, stone walls, iron gates, tall golden windows glowing against the storm. A duke's residence. Exactly the kind of place she'd been trying to escape. She almost turned back. Then lightning cracked across the sky so violently the ground beneath her trembled. Eveline ran toward the gates. By the time she reached the front entrance, she could barely breathe. A servant opened the door halfway. One look at her soaked clothing and muddy boots told him everything he thought he needed to know. Poor, harmless, forgettable. Kitchen entrance is around back. Before he could close the door, a deep male voice echoed from inside the hall. "Who is it?" The servant hesitated, then stepped aside reluctantly. And Eveline Ashcombe came face to face with the man whose name half the country feared, Duke Adrian Ravenshire. 32, war hero, landowner, infamously ruthless in Parliament. The kind of man newspapers called brilliant, and servants called dangerous. He stood near the staircase wearing a black waistcoat partially undone, as if exhaustion had interrupted him mid-evening. But his eyes were the unsettling part. Sharp, observant, impossible to fool. Rainwater dripped from Eveline's hair onto polished marble floors. Neither of them spoke immediately. Then Adrian noticed the bruising around her wrist. Faint, old enough to hide, fresh enough to matter. His expression changed almost invisibly. "Who did that?" Eveline instinctively covered it. "No one, a lie." He knew it instantly, but instead of pressing further, the Duke looked toward the servants. "Prepare the blue guest room." The servant blinked. "My lord, she's clearly—" "I did not ask for your analysis." Silence, dangerous silence. The kind powerful men created effortlessly. The servant bowed quickly and disappeared. Eveline should have thanked him. Instead, she asked the one question that truly mattered. "Why help me?" The Duke studied her for several seconds, too long, then finally answered, "Because people only run like that." His eyes dropped briefly toward her bruised wrist, when they believed staying would kill them. And suddenly, for the first time since fleeing London, Eveline no longer felt invisible, which was dangerous, because Lord Whitmore's men were still searching, and the Duke of Ravenshire had just unknowingly opened his door to the most wanted missing bride in England. There is something deeply unsettling about being seen by the exact person you are hiding from. Not literally, emotionally. And Eveline Ashcombe realized that danger the second Duke Adrian Ravenshire looked at her too carefully. Before we continue, tell me this in the comments. Do you think the Duke already suspects who she really is? Or is he falling for the lie? And if you enjoy stories filled with tension, forbidden attraction, and dangerous secrets, subscribe now. Because this house is about to become a battlefield. The blue guest room overlooked the eastern cliffs. By morning, the storm had softened into gray mist rolling over Ravenshire lands like smoke from an old war. Eveline had barely slept. Every creak in the manor sounded like footsteps coming for her. Every passing servant made her heart race. She kept expecting Lord Whitmore's men to burst through the doors. Instead, a maid arrived carrying breakfast and a simple brown dress. "The Duke says your clothing was ruined." Eveline touched the fabric carefully. Plain, modest, warm, no silk, no embroidery, no expectation. It should not have felt luxurious, yet somehow it did. Ravenshire Manor operated differently from aristocratic homes she'd known. Too quiet, too disciplined. Servants moved quickly but never fearfully. Footmen spoke respectfully instead of trembling. Even the kitchen staff laughed occasionally. Something Eveline had almost never heard inside noble estates. That told her more about the Duke than gossip ever could. Cruel men created silent houses. Adrian Ravenshire's house was not silent, still dangerous, but not cruel, and that distinction unsettled her more than she expected. By noon, she insisted on earning her stay. "I can sew," she told the housekeeper. Mrs. Harding looked skeptical. "Your hands say otherwise." Eveline instinctively hid them. Her fingers carried no factory scars, no burns from kitchen labor, no roughness from years of physical work, the hands of a woman raised carefully. I was employed by a seamstress, Eveline lied. Mrs. Harding narrowed her eyes, then shrugged. We'll see. The problem with pretending to be poor was not clothing, it was instinct. Eveline thanked people too formally, stood too straight, pronounced words too carefully. At lunch, one kitchen maid stared openly. You talk strange. I'm from the South. No, the girl said slowly. You talk expensive. Several servants laughed. Eveline forced herself to smile. But later that evening, she accidentally made things worse, much worse. The Duke's steward had been struggling over estate ledgers for hours when Eveline passed through the library carrying folded linens. Columns of numbers covered the desk. Agricultural losses, tenant debts, railway negotiations, real problems. The kind nobleman usually ignored while servants suffered beneath them. Without thinking, Eveline stopped. You calculated the grain tariffs incorrectly. The steward blinked. What? She immediately regretted speaking, but it was too late. That figure, she pointed carefully, assumes last year's transport rates. Northern rail expansion increased costs nearly 12% after the flooding. Silence. The steward stared at her, then slowly recalculated. His face changed. She's right. A second voice came from the doorway. I know. Eveline froze. The Duke. Of course it was the Duke. Adrian stood leaning against the library entrance, watching her with dangerous calm. How? He asked quietly. Would a seamstress know railway economics? Her pulse stumbled. Think. Quickly. My father discussed numbers often. What did he do? Shipping. Where? Kent. Too slow. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Adrian Ravensshire noticed everything. That night during dinner, the Duke watched her constantly, not obviously, which somehow felt worse. Eveline sat at the far end of the table while rain tapped softly against tall windows. You read? He asked suddenly. A little. You quoted Milton this morning. Her fork paused halfway. Damn, one of the younger maids looked confused. You know poetry? Eveline recovered quickly. My employer liked books. The Duke's eyes never left her face. And taught servant girls Latin? Silence. Hot, unbearable silence. Then Adrian leaned back slightly, not exposing her, not yet, but thinking. That was worse. Outside Ravensshire lands, the search for Eveline intensified. Newspapers finally received whispers about the missing engagement. Not names, just rumors. A wealthy young woman vanished before marriage. Possible abduction. Possible scandal. The public became obsessed instantly, because people have always loved stories about women escaping powerful men, especially women who actually succeed. In London cafes, women secretly discussed her disappearance, with admiration disguised as concern. Some called her foolish, others called her brave. One newspaper even printed an anonymous sentence that spread rapidly across the city. A woman fleeing marriage is not always running from love. Sometimes she is running from survival. No one knew Eveline herself had written those words months earlier in a private women's journal under a fake name. Now the entire country debated them. 2 days later, Lord Whitmore's investigators arrived in Blackthorn Village. That changed everything. Eveline overheard it accidentally while polishing silver near the servants' corridor. 2 men asking questions, a footman whispered, looking for some missing lady. Her blood turned cold. What lady? Runaway noble, apparently. Another servant laughed. Probably ran off with a stable boy. But Eveline already knew better. Lord Whitmore would never stop quietly. Men like him did not lose possessions gracefully. That evening, she made a terrible mistake. Fear made her careless. She slipped into the Duke's study, intending only to confirm whether investigators had reached Ravensshire Manor. Instead, she found Adrian standing beside the fireplace holding a newspaper, waiting. You move very silently for a seamstress. Eveline stopped breathing. I was looking for Mrs. Harding. In my private study? The fire crackled between them. Adrian folded the newspaper slowly. You're educated. Silence. You understand politics. Another step closer. You know estate economics. Another. You speak like a woman raised among nobility. Eveline backed away instinctively. You're mistaken. No, he said softly. You're lying. The words landed harder because he said them without cruelty, without triumph, just certainty, and somehow that made her want to tell him everything, which terrified her. Who are you hiding from? He asked. Not, who are you? Who are you hiding from? A completely different question. One that revealed exactly what kind of man he was. Eveline's throat tightened. Because for the first time since fleeing London, someone sounded concerned instead of curious. But trust was dangerous. Trust got women trapped. She knew that. Women across England knew that. There were entire articles now, quietly passed between wives and daughters, warning women how quickly charm became control, how easily protection became ownership. Eveline had memorized those warnings. And yet, standing here in candlelight with rain whispering against the windows, she wanted desperately to believe Adrian Ravensshire was different. That was the most dangerous feeling of all. Then came the knock at the study door. A servant entered quickly. "My lord, the investigators have arrived." Everything inside Eveline stopped. The servant continued. "They claim they're searching for a missing woman connected to Lord Whitmore." Adrian's eyes shifted instantly toward Eveline, not shocked, realizing. Pieces aligning silently behind those sharp gray eyes. Eveline could almost see the exact second he understood. The bruised wrist, the false identity, the education, the fear. Her voice broke slightly. "Please, not noble anymore, not composed, just afraid. Please don't tell them." The Duke studied her for one long, unbearable moment. Then finally asked, "Did you run willingly?" "Yes." "Were you harmed?" A pause. "Not yet." Something dark moved behind Adrian's expression. Not pity. Anger. Cold anger. The kind men carried into war. Then he looked toward the servant. "Tell the investigators," the Duke said calmly, "that no such woman has entered Ravensshire Manor." The servant hesitated. "My lord, if Lord Whitmore learns—" "He'll learn," Adrian said quietly, "that I do not surrender frightened women to men who hunt them." And for the first time in weeks, Eveline felt safe enough to cry. People often think love begins with attraction. It doesn't. Not real love. Real love begins the moment someone sees the worst fear inside you and stays anyway. Before we continue, tell me honestly in the comments, do you think Eveline should trust the Duke now? Or is trusting powerful men always dangerous? And if this story is pulling you in, subscribe now. Because from this point forward, every choice they make could destroy them both. The lie inside Ravensshire Manor grew heavier by the day. Not because Adrian exposed her, because he didn't. That somehow felt more intimate, more dangerous. Eveline expected questions after the investigators left. Instead, the Duke simply poured himself a drink and stared into the fire. "They'll return," she whispered. "Yes, you should send me away before they do." Adrian took a slow sip. No. The answer came too quickly, as if some part of him had already decided long ago. Eveline watched the firelight move across his face. Beneath the confidence, there was exhaustion there. The kind soldiers carried home from battlefields long after wars ended. "You barely know me," she said carefully. His eyes lifted toward her. "I know enough." Over the next week, the manor transformed into something strange. Not romance, not yet. Something quieter, something far more dangerous. Understanding. Eveline began helping in the estate office during evenings under the excuse of organizing ledgers. Adrian never officially asked for her assistance, but documents somehow continued appearing near her seat. Tax reports, tenant disputes, mining contracts. The Duke would work silently while she read nearby. Sometimes for hours. No flirting, no games. Just the quiet intimacy of two lonely people existing in the same room. And slowly, the walls inside Eveline began collapsing. One evening, she found him asleep in the library chair. A candle still burned low beside scattered parliamentary papers. Adrian's breathing was uneven, disturbed. Then suddenly, he jerked awake violently, grabbing for a pistol beneath the table. Eveline stumbled backward in shock. The Duke froze the second he recognized her. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Adrian slowly lowered the weapon. "You were dreaming," she said softly. "No. A lie." This one she recognized immediately. Moonlight revealed sweat across his collar despite the cold room. War memories. She'd heard returning soldiers describe them before in London hospitals. Men waking convinced they were still surrounded by gunfire. England celebrated heroes publicly, then abandoned them privately. Even dukes were not immune to that. "You fought in Spain," Eveline said quietly. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Yes, my cousin returned from war, unable to sleep near open windows." Silence. Then, Finally, I watched 17 men die in 6 minutes. The words came flatly, too flatly, as if emotion itself had become dangerous. Eveline felt something ache painfully inside her chest, because suddenly the terrifying Duke of Ravenshire no longer looked powerful, just tired, profoundly tired. The next morning, Blackthorn Village exploded with gossip. Lord Whitmore had escalated the search publicly. Reward posters appeared across neighboring towns. £50 for information regarding the whereabouts of Miss Eveline Ashcombe. Below the announcement sat an illustrated sketch almost accurate enough to destroy her. Almost. Mrs. Harding ripped one down outside the bakery before returning home furious. Men become monsters when embarrassed, the housekeeper muttered. Eveline froze. You saw the posters, Mrs. Harding looked directly at her. Long enough, carefully enough. Then quietly asked, did he hurt you? Eveline's throat tightened. No. Would he have? A pause. Eventually, Mrs. Harding nodded once, like a woman confirming something she already knew. Because older women recognized danger faster than younger ones. They had survived it before. By now, several servants suspected the truth. Not because Eveline behaved arrogantly, because she behaved educated. There was a difference. She read newspapers, understood political debates, spoke about tenant reforms, once accidentally corrected the pronunciation of a French diplomat's name during dinner. Servants noticed everything, but strangely, none betrayed her, because beneath class divisions, many women understood something universal, fear, and many men understood something else, what powerful men were capable of behind closed doors. That same week, Parliament itself became tangled in the scandal. Whispers spread that Lord Whitmore's missing fiancée had fled unwilling arrangements. Women's rights essays quietly surged again in popularity across London reading circles. One article caused outrage among aristocrats by asking, if marriage requires coercion, is it truly honorable? Church leaders condemned it immediately. Women passed it between friends anyway. Eveline read the article secretly in the library, then noticed Adrian watching her from across the room. You agree with it, he observed. Yes, that opinion could ruin a woman socially. A sad smile touched her face. I suspect my social survival is already beyond repair. Something unreadable crossed his expression then. Admiration, perhaps. Or grief. Later that night, the emotional distance between them finally cracked. It happened during a thunderstorm.
There's something painful about watching Eveline run, because deep down, many people understand that feeling, not necessarily escaping marriage, but escaping expectations, escaping the version of yourself everyone else already decided you should become. And what makes this story dangerous is that Adrian is the first person who looks at her without asking, what can she provide? He asks, what happened to her? That changes everything. Because sometimes love doesn't begin with desire. It begins with finally feeling safe enough to breathe.
Of course it did. Storms had become strangely tied to every important moment between them. Eveline stood near the upstairs balcony, unable to sleep, while lightning rolled over distant hills. Behind her, Adrian approached quietly. You hate storms, he noticed. I hate not knowing what comes after them. For a moment, only rain answered. Then the Duke spoke softly. My mother once told me something after my first battle. Eveline turned toward him. She said, fear itself is not weakness. His eyes remained on the rain beyond the balcony. The dangerous people are the ones who stop feeling fear entirely. The words lingered between them, intimate, honest, real. And suddenly Eveline realized something terrifying. She no longer feared him. That was infinitely more dangerous than fearing him. Why are you helping me? She asked finally. The real question. Not politeness, not curiosity. Truth. Truth. Adrian's expression darkened slightly. Because I failed someone once. The answer surprised her. Who? A long silence followed. Then my younger sister. Pain moved across his face almost invisibly. She was promised to a wealthy man when she was 19. My father insisted it was advantageous. His jaw tightened. 3 months after the wedding, she stopped speaking almost entirely. Eveline's heart sank. She died 2 years later. Rain hammered against the balcony roof. I was in Spain when it happened, Adrian continued quietly. By the time I returned, everyone called it illness, but his eyes said something else, something colder. She wasn't ill, Eveline whispered. No, the Duke said softly. She was trapped, and suddenly Eveline understood everything. Why he noticed bruises. Why he hated Lord Whitmore instantly. Why he refused to hand her over. This was not rescue. Not entirely. Part of Adrian Ravenshire was trying to save the sister he could not save before. The realization should have comforted her. Instead, it frightened her deeply, because emotional debts created dangerous attachments. An attachment led to heartbreak. She knew that. Yet when Adrian stepped closer beneath the stormlight, she didn't step away. Their faces hovered painfully near now, close enough to feel each other breathing, close enough to destroy everything. Then, a sharp knock shattered the moment. A servant's voice echoed urgently from downstairs. "My lord!" Adrian pulled back immediately. "What is it?" The investigators returned. Eveline's blood ran cold, but the servant sounded worse than before. They brought magistrates this time. Silence, heavy silence. Then came the final blow. And Lord Whitmore himself is with them. There are moments that reveal who people truly are. Not during comfort, not during victory, but at the exact moment choosing kindness becomes expensive. And for Duke Adrian Ravenshire, that moment had finally arrived. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you think love is worth sacrificing power for, or does power always win in the end? And if this story has captured you so far, subscribe now. Because the next hour inside Ravenshire Manor changes everything forever. The front doors of Ravenshire Manor opened just after midnight. Rain swept violently through the entrance hall as Lord Percival Whitmore stepped inside, surrounded by magistrates and armed officers. Even soaked by stormwater, he looked immaculate, controlled, dangerous, the kind of man who believed money could purchase morality. Behind the upstairs balcony railing, Eveline stopped breathing. "He found me," she whispered. "Mrs." Harding grabbed her wrist immediately. "No," the older woman said, firmly. "He suspects. There's a difference." Down below, Adrian descended the staircase with terrifying calm. Not hurried. Not intimidated. A duke greeting unwanted guests in his own kingdom. "Lord Whitmore," Adrian said evenly. "Breaking into private estates at midnight is usually considered poor manners." Whitmore smiled thinly. "And harboring another man's fiancée is usually considered treasonous." The entire hall went still. Servants froze. Footmen avoided eye contact. Even thunder outside seemed distant now. Adrian's expression never changed. "You accuse recklessly. I accuse accurately." Whitmore removed a folded poster from his coat and placed it slowly on the entrance table. Eveline's sketch stared upward from the paper. "She is here." The magistrate cleared his throat nervously. "We possess authority to search the premises, Your Grace." Every servant in the hall looked toward Adrian, waiting, because everyone understood what this truly meant. Not scandal. War. Upstairs, Eveline's pulse thundered so violently she thought she might faint. Mrs. Harding pulled her quickly toward the rear corridor. "We hide you in the Old West Passage." "No," Eveline whispered. The older woman stopped. "If they search the manor thoroughly, they'll find me eventually. And Adrian will suffer for it." There it was. The terrifying truth she had tried ignoring for weeks. This no longer endangered only her. A duke protecting another nobleman's runaway fiancée could destroy his political alliances, parliamentary influence, estate negotiations, public reputation, possibly even his title. All because he chose compassion over convenience. And suddenly Eveline hated herself for staying. Below, the search began. Magistrates moved room to room, while servants stood rigid with tension. Whitmore wandered calmly through the manor, like a man already savoring victory. "That girl is unstable," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Emotional. Influenced by dangerous modern ideas." Adrian's eyes darkened. "What ideas?" Whitmore laughed softly. "The absurd belief that women should govern their own futures." Several servants exchanged glances immediately, because the world was changing now. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Factories had pushed women into labor forces. Newspapers had given them voices. Education had given some of them language for their unhappiness. And powerful men were beginning to panic. Whitmore represented that panic perfectly. "She belongs with her family," he continued coldly, "not wandering freely among strangers." Adrian stepped closer. "She belongs nowhere. She is forced to remain." The room fell silent again. Even the magistrates looked uncomfortable now. because this had stopped sounding like legal discussion. It sounded personal. Upstairs, Eveline made her decision. I'm ending this. Mrs. Harding stared at her. If I surrender willingly, he cannot accuse Adrian of kidnapping or conspiracy. And you think Whitmore will show mercy afterward? No. The honesty of that answer hurt. But Eveline already understood something many women eventually learned. Sometimes survival and freedom were not the same thing. She could survive Whitmore, perhaps, but freedom? Never. Still, Adrian should not burn because of her. As she moved toward the staircase, another voice stopped her. You truly love him. Eveline turned sharply. Thomas, her younger brother, stepped from the shadows near the corridor entrance, soaked from rain and breathing hard. She stared in disbelief. How did you? I followed Whitmore's men. Emotion cracked across his face. You idiot, he whispered painfully. Do you know what fathers become since you vanished? Eveline looked away. I had no choice. You did. No, she snapped quietly. I had options. Women like me always have options. Her eyes filled suddenly. Marry quietly. Smile politely. Endure privately. A broken laugh escaped her. That is not freedom, Thomas. For the first time since childhood, her brother looked at her not as a sister, but as a woman trapped inside rules he would never fully understand. Then he said something unexpected. Mother sent me. Eveline froze. What? Thomas swallowed hard. She told me if I found you, to tell you not to come home. Shock rippled through her. She said she once tried running too. The words shattered something inside Eveline completely. All those years, all that coldness, all that obedience. And beneath it had lived another frightened young woman who failed to escape. Mrs. Harding quietly wiped tears from her eyes. Because older women always recognized these stories. They carried them silently across generations. Downstairs, the search finally reached the West Wing. A magistrate approached Adrian carefully. We've nearly completed inspection, Your Grace. Whitmore smiled. Excellent. Then footsteps echoed above. Everyone looked up. Eveline stood at the top of the staircase. No disguise now. No servant posture. No lowered eyes. For the first time since fleeing London, she stood like herself again. An aristocratic daughter, proud, terrified, free. Whitmore's expression transformed instantly. Possession, relief, triumph. There you are. Adrian looked upward slowly. And the second their eyes met, Eveline saw it. Fear. Not for himself, for her. She descended carefully, one step at a time. The entire manor watched in silence. I came willingly, she announced clearly. The Duke did not abduct me. Whitmore extended his hand immediately. Come here, Eveline. But she didn't move. That tiny act of resistance changed the entire room. Whitmore noticed too. His smile faded slightly. You've embarrassed yourself enough. I will not marry you. The magistrates shifted uncomfortably. Whitmore's voice hardened. You are emotional. No, Eveline said softly. I'm finally honest. The room became deathly still, because everyone understood what they were witnessing. Not rebellion, reclamation. Whitmore stepped forward sharply. You are still legally bound to me. She is not property. Adrian's voice cut through the hall like a blade. Whitmore turned slowly. You would risk political ruin over a hysterical girl? Something cold entered Adrian's expression then. The kind of cold men carried into battlefields. She is neither hysterical nor yours. Whitmore laughed once, dangerously. And what exactly is she to you? Silence, terrible silence. Eveline felt her heartbeat stumble. Because suddenly the entire room understood the real question. Not legality, love. Adrian looked at Eveline for one long, devastating second, then answered, She is someone who deserves the right to choose. The words hit harder than any declaration of passion ever could. Because for perhaps the first time in her life, a man saw her as human before seeing her as useful. And Eveline realized in that exact moment, she loved him, completely, irrevocably, dangerously. Whitmore saw it too, and rage finally cracked through his polished exterior. You stupid girl, he hissed. Do you think men like him truly marry women who disgrace society? Adrian moved instantly, fast enough that several officers flinched. If you speak to her that way again, the Duke said quietly, you will leave this house bleeding. Real fear entered the room now, because everyone suddenly remembered. Adrian Ravenshear was not merely a politician, he was a soldier. Then came the final betrayal. One of the magistrates unfolded a second document carefully. My lord, His voice trembled slightly. There is another matter. Adrian took the paper. His expression darkened instantly. Whitmore smiled slowly, because he already knew. The magistrate cleared his throat. Parliament has been informed of accusations that your grace concealed Lady Eveline unlawfully. He hesitated. Until investigation concludes, your parliamentary seat is suspended. The entire hall fell silent. Whitmore had done it. He couldn't force Eveline's love. So he aimed for the next thing powerful men valued most: destruction. And suddenly protecting her had become catastrophically expensive. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is disappoint everyone who expected their obedience. And sometimes love is not about saving someone. Sometimes it is about standing beside them while they save themselves. Before we finish this story, tell me in the comments, do you think Eveline made the right choice by destroying her old life for freedom? Or was the cost too high? And if stories like this move you deeply, subscribe now. Because the next story may be even more devastating than this one. By morning, news of the scandal had spread across half of England. Newspapers devoured it instantly. Runaway noblewoman found inside Duke's estate parliamentary investigation. Underway Ravenshire. Accused of interference, servants whispered over breakfast tables. Politicians exchanged rumors behind closed doors. Women clipped newspaper articles and hid them inside bookshelves before their husbands returned home. Because this story was no longer just gossip. It had become symbolic. A woman fleeing an arranged marriage. A powerful man choosing protection over reputation. Society pretending outrage while secretly watching with fascination. Inside Ravenshire Manor, the atmosphere shifted painfully. Staff moved cautiously now, not because they blamed Eveline, because they understood consequences. So if Adrian lost political standing, estate contracts could collapse, tenant protections might disappear, rival families could attack, weakened leadership. One woman's freedom had collided directly with power. That was how society often worked. Freedom always seemed expensive when women asked for it. Eveline stood alone in the East Garden when Adrian finally found her. Morning fog curled through rose bushes silvered by rain. You should not be outside, he said quietly. You should not have defended me. He stopped beside her. Neither looked at the other immediately. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt inevitable. You regret staying here, he asked. No. Her answer came instantly. And that frightened her, because love had arrived so quietly, she never saw the exact moment it happened. Maybe it was the library conversations, or the storms, or the way he listened instead of controlled. Maybe it was simply the first time a man had looked at her and seen a person instead of an arrangement. You may lose everything now, she whispered. Adrian finally looked at her directly. I lost my peace years ago. A faint, sad smile crossed his face. Titles are easier. The honesty nearly broke her. Eveline stepped closer carefully. You cannot keep destroying yourself to save me. Something sharpened behind his eyes then. You still believe this is only about saving you. A pause. Then quietly, it stopped being only that a long time ago. Her breath caught. The world seemed strangely still around them. No politics, no scandals, no searching officers. Just two exhausted people standing too close in morning fog. Then Adrian lifted one hand slowly and touched her face, gentle, as though she might disappear. Eveline closed her eyes instinctively, because after a lifetime of being handled like responsibility, being touched with tenderness felt almost unbearable. And when he kissed her, it was not dramatic, not possessive, not hungry. It felt like relief, like two people finally telling the truth. But peace never survives long inside powerful families. That afternoon, Eveline's parents arrived at Ravenshire Manor. Her father entered first carrying fury like a weapon. Her mother followed silently behind him, smaller than Eveline remembered. Sadness had aged her somehow within weeks. Look at what you've done, Lord Ashcombe snapped immediately. Do you understand the humiliation you've caused this family? Eveline held his gaze steadily now. No, she said softly. I understand the humiliation you were willing to cause me. The words stunned him silent. Because daughters of their world were not trained to speak like that. Not allowed. Her father's face darkened. You were given security. I was being traded. You are naive. No, Eveline replied quietly. I was obedient. There's a difference. Behind her, Adrian remained perfectly still, watching. ready. Her father noticed immediately, then sneered coldly. So this is what this truly is. His eyes shifted toward the Duke. You've ruined yourself over infatuation, Adrian answered calmly. No. She simply reminded me what integrity looks like. Then Eveline's mother spoke for the first time. Percival Whitmore is being investigated. The room froze. Her father turned sharply. What? Lady Ashcombe looked pale. One of his former servants came forward yesterday. Silence thickened instantly. She continued carefully. There are accusations of physical abuse against his late wife. Eveline felt ice move through her veins. No one spoke, because suddenly the nightmare she escaped became horrifyingly real. Her mother's eyes filled slowly with tears. I should have stopped it, she whispered. I knew something was wrong. Her father stared in disbelief. That's impossible. No, Lady Ashcombe said brokenly. What's impossible is how long women survive while no one listens. The room fell silent again. And for the first time in Eveline's life, her mother sounded honest. The investigation exploded publicly within days. Additional servants came forward. Financial coercion allegations surfaced. Letters from Whitmore's late wife were discovered hidden inside a locked writing desk. The newspapers changed tone immediately. The runaway bride narrative transformed overnight into something much larger. The woman who escaped before it was too late across England. Women discussed the case endlessly, not because aristocrats fascinated them, because the fear did. Too many recognized pieces of themselves inside Eveline's story. The pressure, the silence, the expectation to endure. Even Parliament could no longer ignore the growing public reaction, especially after several reform-minded politicians used the scandal to argue publicly against forced marital arrangements. Change did not happen instantly. It never does. But stories like this created cracks, and cracks eventually became fractures. Weeks later, Adrian's suspension was quietly lifted. No formal apology came. Men in power rarely apologize cleanly. But the accusations against him collapsed once evidence proved Eveline had remained willingly at Ravenshire Manor. Still, society had not forgiven them entirely. Invitations disappeared. Whispers followed them at public events. Older aristocrats treated Eveline like contamination. Surprisingly, she no longer cared. Because freedom changes people permanently. Once someone tastes it, returning to captivity becomes impossible. One evening near the end of autumn, Eveline stood beside Adrian, overlooking Ravenshire lands, painted gold beneath the setting sun. You know they'll speak about us for years, she said softly. They already were. She laughed quietly, then turned toward him. Do you ever regret opening the door that night? Adrian pretended to consider it. You tracked mud across imported Italian marble. She smiled for real this time. Not the polite aristocratic smile she learned as a girl. A genuine one, warm, alive, free. The Duke's expression softened as he watched her. Then he said the one thing she would remember for the rest of her life. You were never difficult to love, Eveline. His thumb brushed gently across her hand. Only difficult to possess. And suddenly, every painful thing she survived felt worth enduring just to reach this moment. Not because a Duke rescued her, but because she finally rescued herself and found love afterward. Not before, after, exactly where it belonged.
There's something painful about watching Eveline run, because deep down, many people understand that feeling, not necessarily escaping marriage, but escaping expectations. Escaping the version of yourself everyone else already decided you should become. And what makes this story dangerous is that Adrian is the first person who looks at her without asking, what can she provide? He asks, what happened to her? That changes everything. Because sometimes love doesn't begin with desire. It begins with finally feeling safe enough to breathe.